Here it is, guys. Today's awesome message. Buckle up. Mark's taking it.
Well, hey there, Elevate friends and family. Great to have you with us today as we move into the second week of a new series we just launched called The World Spins Madly On Volume 2, which is the direct successor to our series just before that, The World Spins Madly On Volume 1. In Volume 1, we looked and took lessons from the life of a spokesperson for God, a prophet named Elijah. And Elijah, we picked things up when Elijah knew his time on earth was coming to an end, and God instructed him to identify a successor. And in fact, God told him who that successor was going to be, a man named Elisha. And last week when we launched Volume 2 of this series, we picked up where Elijah went to find Elisha and signaled to Elisha to come follow him and effectively to begin the process of passing the baton from one generation to the next. And to Elisha's credit, he followed God through trusting that Elijah was being led by God and went to follow him, even though, by the way, Elisha didn't know the details. So there's a ton of stuff to unpack last week, a ton of stuff to learn. And so if you missed that, then I would strongly encourage you, go and find us on your favorite podcast app. Type in Elevate Church Perth and we'll be there. And you'll be able to pick up last week and then, of course, bring yourself up to speed with what we're going to cover up today. Now, today I'm going to just essentially continue things from where Elijah has left the building. He's ascended into heaven, and Elisha has now firmly taken hold of the baton that was passed to him. And the miracles started flowing straight away. I mean, I'm going to have to skip over, for the sake of time, two almost successive miracles where God once again parted the waters like he did to get the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. I'm going to have to skip over the next miracle where the leaders of Jericho asked Elisha if he could heal their waters. Their waters were poisoned, so they couldn't be used for either drinking or for agricultural purposes, which essentially means the whole nation is under threat. And Elisha, used by God, healed their water permanently. And there's a lot I could talk about that. I don't have time to get into that today. The next thing was kind of bizarre. This group of young people confronted Elisha and started kind of insulting him for being follicularly challenged. And if you don't know what that means, let me just say, they started saying to him, "Go away, Baldy," taunting him repeatedly. So Elisha cursed them, and out of the bushes came two bears, and they mauled the kids to death, killing 42 of them. And it's like, okay, that's a bit weird. And I look, for the record, I don't know what that's all about, but I wonder if every now and then you might think, I wish I had that superpower. You know, when the colleague starts treating you a little bit disrespectfully in the meeting, you're thinking, I could do with a couple of bears mauling them to death right now. You know, the family member who's running their mouth against you around the Christmas dinner table, you're like, bears? Anyway, and then just move on. Anyway, probably not something I encourage. Now, if you've got your smartphone camera, how about you scan this flow code? It's going to take you to 2 Kings chapter 3 in the Message Version. So while you're doing that, let me catch you up. So during the life of Elijah, he entered the pages of history when the nation of Israel had been ruled over a span of 200 years by 19 successive and progressively more evil kings, culminating in the most evil of all, a guy named Ahab. And that's actually who God sent Elijah to on multiple occasions to confront and stage an intervention. Now, Elijah has left the building. Also, by this point, so has King Ahab. And he's handed over the kingdom of Israel to his son Joram. Now, Joram is less evil than his dad, but he's still evil, and he still hasn't led the nation of Israel back to worshiping the God of Israel. All right, so now pay attention. Here's a very quick flyover of what happens next. During King Ahab's rule, the king of a nearby nation, the nation of Moab, he was required, or Ahab insisted, forced him to pay like a tax. 100,000 sheep and 100,000 rams, which was a phenomenally large amount. Now, Ahab's dead. His sons now succeeded him. The king of Moab thought this was the opportunity to actually say, no deal, no more sheep, no more rams. Well, unsurprisingly, that sparked a war. Joram, now the king of Israel, got together with the king of Judah, a guy named Jehoshaphat, and the king of Edom, not the cheese, and they formed an alliance to go together, all three kingdoms, armies, to confront Moab, essentially demanding pay up or we're going to slaughter you all. And it kind of appears that they might have thought it was going to be a short trip and a quick victory. However, after 7 days of their armies and their animals and their whole kind of cargo marching through the desert, they actually ran out of water for themselves and their animals. They underestimated the challenges they'd face. Things didn't go as expected. And we pick up the story, we pick up the slice of history where they needed a miracle. Anyone relate? You know, you're actually doing what Jesus asked you to do, and then all of a sudden you hit some unexpected circumstances that in the moment felt like they would derail you, and you needed a miracle. Maybe your relationship with your child has been going great, and then kind of out of nowhere things go south, and you are saying, God, I don't know how to fix this. I need a miracle. Maybe you've been progressing with your financial health, getting out of consumer debt, making some progress, started giving, and then an emergency hit. And you're like, I don't have the money put aside for this. I need a miracle. And the rookie mistake in these situations is to default to saying, well, if only I had fill in the blank, then I could do something. You know, if I only had a better job, then I could do something. Well, maybe, but until that day comes, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. Well, if only I'd gone to university, then I could advance in my career. Well, yeah, maybe, but until you have the opportunity to take up some further studies, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. Well, if only we had more resources, then we could do more for God. Well, again, maybe, but until then, it doesn't mean you can't do anything. So here were these three armies allied together, no water for the troops and the animals. Thankfully, the king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, who still himself wasn't following the God of Israel, he at least sort of had a glimpse of, I wonder if maybe the God of Israel can help us. Does anyone know if there's a prophet of the God of Israel somewhere around. And one of Joram's entourage says, I know a guy. His name's Elisha. He used to be Elijah's right-hand man. So they summoned for Elisha. Here's the idea. Your greatest need becomes a blessing when it drives you to depend on God. They literally had no other option. Thankfully, they took the best option. They called out to the God of Israel via a prophet named Elisha. Well, Elisha initially was a bit reluctant. It's like, well, what have you done for me lately? None of you are following the God of Israel. Why should I help you? Well, anyway, he eventually relented. And he prayed, and he felt God tell him to tell the kings to instruct their soldiers, grab some shovels and head into the valley, the dry valley, that's the desert, and start digging ditches. Yeah, no bobcats, no excavators, no heavy machinery, shovels. This doesn't make sense on any level, especially when you think about it. They're dehydrated. They're in the desert, and it's like, yeah, let's go and do some manual labor. But here was God's promise. Elijah then said, God's word, dig ditches all over this valley, and here's what will happen. You won't hear the wind, you won't see the rain, but this valley is going to fill up with water, and your army and your animals will drink their fill. This is easy for God to do. Oh, and he'll also hand over Moab to you. A promise of provision, unconventional in its approach, but the promise stood tall. And so here's the question, or at least the realization, while you're waiting for God's provision, you can be doing something. And the big idea is this: do what you can do and trust God to do what only He can do. Only God can provide the water, but sometimes He wants you to dig a ditch. It's still God's miracle, but God sometimes invites, in fact, oftentimes invites us to participate, and oftentimes invites us to take this step of faith first before He then reveals and demonstrates His faithfulness. So, if you wanted God to help you improve your health, start walking 20 minutes a day. If you want God to be more involved in your finances, take the step of faith and start giving or increase your giving. If you want God to help you advance your career or your business, get a mentor, a coach, or go and do some further study. And the list goes on. While you're waiting for God's provision, you can be doing something. Grab a shovel and start digging. And some people get stuck here. They're like, well, why would I dig a ditch when I actually need a full valley of water? But the reality is that this is how the journey of faith works. Believe big and be willing to start small. Now, on the one hand, I know far too many people who aren't dreaming and believing big enough. They're praying small prayers to a small God, safe prayers. And yet, I know some other people who maybe have been believing big, but they haven't connected the dots back to the jump-off point of starting small. Now, you can read what happens next for yourself. And then this happened. One day, the wife of a man from the guild of prophets called out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. You well know what a good man he was, devoted to God. And now the man to whom he was in debt is on his way to collect by taking my 2 children as slaves. Now, we don't conclusively know who this woman is. We don't conclusively know who her husband was. There's some theories, but that's not really the main point here. So I'm just going to leave that. You can fish around for yourself if that's important to you. The main point here is that this woman enters the pages of history with her back placed firmly against the wall. This was not a woman in a no big deal situation. This was a woman in a very big deal situation. Lost her husband, can't pay her bills, and her sons are on the line. To the debt collector. So humanly speaking, she had no options, and because she had no options, it appeared she maybe felt like she had no hope. And maybe some of you can relate. You know, you've been living under a cloud of anxiety and depression for so long you can no longer see a way out. You've been buried under financial debt, or you're buried under so much financial debt that you can't see a way out of it. Maybe you're struggling in your marriage or struggling with your kids, and you think you've tried everything and you can't see a way forward. Maybe you've received a serious health diagnosis and you're wondering if this is the end of the line for you. Well, Elisha said, I wonder how I can be of help. Tell me, what do you have in your house? Well, she said, nothing. Now, before I get to the woman's response, let me just give you a bonus thought. Notice Elisha didn't say to her, my thoughts and prayers are going to be with you. I'll send up some thoughts and prayers. He made himself available. How can I be of help? How can God use me in this desperate situation to be part of the solution? So he says, tell me what you have in your house. And she said, nothing. And it turns out this is an interesting response, saying nothing, but actually, I think we understand this. I think we can maybe even kind of empathize with her, because when things get desperate, it's easy to lose perspective. It's easy to focus on what we don't have and lose sight of what we do have. But here's God's lesson in these types of situations. Stop obsessing over what you don't have and start working with what you've got. And now it's possible that Elisha gave her the look that you give your kids when you ask them, hey, so did your teacher give you any homework to do tonight? And they say, no, nothing. And you're like, you know, or your wife walks out of the bedroom when it's just about time to leave for the dinner or the wedding and says, I've got nothing to wear. And you look at her with the, really? Nothing? Nothing, she said. Well, okay, I do have a little oil. Well, the great news is that we serve a God who specializes in doing a lot with a little. Yeah, but maybe if I had more, I could do more. But probably. But start with what you've got and see what God does with that. Now, let me take you back to March 2020. Here in Australia, here in Perth, Western Australia, we were just starting to enter lockdowns 1.0, and meant that churches couldn't gather in person. Many other industries affected similarly, of course. And a group of fellow church leaders and I got together for lunch ironically, you could only get takeout, and then we went and sat in a park and ate it. You couldn't sit into a restaurant. Well, anyway, we're sitting around in the park, and the question was like, well, what are you thinking about? What are you feeling in this very unusual situation? What are you doing? And one of the guys says, well, we're actually preemptively laying staff off. Some others said, well, we're preemptively slashing expenses because we don't want to be. And I was like, okay, look, full disclosure, I went into that guy mode. And I said, listen, those moves may turn out to be genius moves. They may turn out to be necessary moves. But can I just ask a different question? Could God possibly turn this crisis into an opportunity? And could the jump-off point be, instead of asking what we can't do and what we can't have, we can't gather together in person, and we don't know how long until we can. Which, 20 years ago, if a church was told you can't meet in person, that would have been it. It would have been a disaster. Just like, see you later. But this was 2020. And so here at Elevate, we asked ourselves, what have we got? What can we do? Not what's been taken for us, because we didn't have any control over that. What have we got? What can we do? Well, we had access to a camera, and pretty much everyone had access to a smartphone. Our music team quickly figured out how to record music remotely and bring that together. We had a couple of media team members who had experience with editing, and we had several more who said, well, I'll do a crash course and learn how to edit. We had two prominent and accessible platforms that were free for us to broadcast on, YouTube and Facebook. And so within the space of a few days, we launched our first ever online experience. Well, that was 167 weeks ago. 167 weekly online experience episodes ago. And God continues to use our online experience to reach people and build people like you, to reach more people and build more people like you. And it started because we asked the question, what have we got? Just a little oil. Okay, great. Let's see what God can do with that. Well, here's what you do, said Elisha. Go up and down the street and borrow jugs and bowls from all your neighbors. And not just a few, all you can get. And then come home and lock the door behind you, you and your sons, and pour oil into each container. And when each is full, set it aside. This woman only had a little oil, and so she had a choice in this moment. This was a hinge moment for her. Pour out the oil in faith, or store up the oil in fear. But here's the reality. God can only multiply what you choose to pour out in faith. So thankfully, she did what Elijah said. She locked the door behind her and her sons, and as they brought the containers to her, she filled them. When all the jugs and bowls were full, she said to her sons, "Another jug, please." He said, "That's it. No more jugs." And then the oil stopped. She went and told the story to the man of God, and he said, "Well, great. Go and sell the oil and make good on your debts and live, both you and your sons, on what's left." Friends and family, offer God what you've got and trust Him to give you what you need. Final thought, this is a bonus thought in case you missed it. God multiplied the oil. Not just to the extent that she could pay off her debts, he multiplied it that she was left with more than enough, that she could both pay off her debts and then have an income stream that her and her sons could live on. More than enough.